One day, three pastors from a local town went fishing together. One was a Lutheran, one was Pentecostal, and one was Baptist. They all arrived at their favorite fishing lake, they got in the boat together, and then they went out into the lake. As the day progressed and the heat rose, the Lutheran pastor reached for the cooler and exclaimed, "We left the cooler on the truck." Well, they didn't want to leave their spot because they'd been pulling in fish all morning. "Not a problem," said the Lutheran pastor. Then he stepped out of the boat, walked across the water to the shore, and brought back drinks for the three men. The Baptist was astounded. A few hours later, they began to get thirsty again. "I'll get some drinks this time," said the Pentecostal. He then stepped out of the boat, walked across the water to the shore, and brought back drinks for the three men. The Baptist was flabbergasted. The day wore on and the men began to get thirsty again. The Baptist says to himself, "Well, I'm at least as holy as these other two guys." So he decided to get drinks himself this time. He stood up, boldly stepped out of the boat, and went straight down. He came up spluttering and spewing, climbed back in the boat, whispered a prayer, and stepped back out onto the water. Again, he went straight down. He came back up, got back in the boat, and a third time stepped out and went straight to the bottom. As he came up the third time, the Lutheran turned to the Pentecostal and said, "You think we should tell him where the rocks are?" Ha ha ha! Funny joke. It's one of my favorite jokes of all time. Of course, Jesus didn't have rocks when he walked on the water. So the events we're going to talk about today occur immediately after the feeding of the 5,000 on Thursday, September 18th, overnight to Friday, September 19th, 27 AD. So we're going to be looking at Matthew chapter 14, verses 22 through 36, Mark chapter 6, verses 45 to 52, and John chapter 6, verses 16 through 21. And here it is. Immediately after this, Jesus insisted that his disciples get back into the boat and cross to the other side of the lake while he sent the people home. After telling everyone goodbye, he went up into the hills by himself to pray. Night fell while he was there alone. Late that night, the disciples were in their boat in the middle of the lake, and Jesus was alone on land. Soon a gale swept down upon them, and the sea grew very rough. They were in trouble far away from land, for a strong wind had risen, and they were fighting heavy waves. About 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came toward them walking on the water. They had rowed 3 or 4 miles when suddenly they saw Jesus walking on the water toward the boat. He intended to go past them, but when they saw him walking on the water, they cried out in terror, thinking he was a ghost. In fear, they cried out, "It's a ghost!" They were all terrified when they saw him. But Jesus spoke to them at once. "Don't be afraid," he said. "Take courage. I am here." Then Peter called out to him, "Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come to you walking on the water." "Yes, come," Jesus said. So Peter went over the side of the boat and walked on the water toward Jesus. But when he saw the strong wind and the waves, he was terrified and began to sink. "Save me, Lord," he shouted. Jesus immediately reached out and grabbed him. "You have so little faith," Jesus said. "Why did you doubt me?" When they climbed back into the boat, the wind stopped. Then the disciples worshipped him. "You really are the Son of God," they exclaimed. They were totally amazed, for they still didn't understand the significance of the miracle of the loaves. Their hearts were too hard to take it in. After they had crossed the lake, they arrived at Gennesaret. They brought the boat on shore and climbed out. The people recognized Jesus at once, and they ran throughout the whole area carrying sick people on mats to wherever they heard he was. Wherever he went, in villages, cities, or the countryside, they brought the sick out to the marketplaces. They begged him to let the sick touch at least the fringe of his robe, and all who touched him were healed. So there's a couple of things here. First, let's just talk about solitude again. As I mentioned the last sermon, getting away is something that Jesus values and something we should do as well. In this case, he actually sends his disciples away so he can get away by himself. He needs time alone with God after such an exhausting time of ministry. And if Jesus needs to get away, how much more do we? I remember what it was like to be in Afghanistan in a combat zone. There was no day off, no weekend, just days after days of work. Literally, I worked every day for a year. However, even in that situation, I made sure to take some time during the week to refresh myself, even for a few hours. We were created to need rest, both physically and spiritually. So if you're not taking time away to rest yourself physically and spiritually, you need to be doing that. Then Jesus is taking a stroll. Now this event is a little different from the one a few weeks ago where Jesus calms the storm. The disciples are struggling in the boat, but this seems more like the normal type of storm they had on the Sea of Galilee. It was still dangerous, but not nearly as dangerous as the one they had encountered previously. Now, one of the things that strikes me about this particular event is that it seems clear that Jesus intended on walking across the water from the very beginning, which makes me wonder if this is something he did often. I mean, did he always walk in the water? Is that something he did regularly? But regardless, he's doing it. He's on top of the water walking. And the other thing that strikes me about this event is that it says Jesus was planning on walking right past the disciples. I mean, he didn't think they needed help, and he was just going to let them work their own way across, and he was just going to go where he was going. In fact, the only reason he stopped was because of their fear. So why did they think he was a ghost? Well, the obvious reason was because he was walking on top of the water. But remember also that the Jews believed the Sea of Galilee was the entrance to hell. Seeing one of the undead walking across the sea in their general direction must have been terrifying indeed. So let's talk about what it means to be a true follower. In order to understand what happens next, you need to understand something about being a talmid, a follower. Any true follower of a rabbi wanted to do exactly what their rabbi did. So if he picked up a rock, they would pick up a rock from the same place. If he went into a house, they would enter that house as well. If he sang a song, they would sing it as well. So if their rabbi walked on water, then what were they going to do? Well, the obvious thing would be for them to try to walk on the water as well. The truly amazing thing about this particular event isn't that Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water. The amazing thing is that the other 11 disciples didn't get out of the boat. They just sat there. So Peter sinks, Jesus saves him, and then Jesus says, "Well, you still have so little faith. Why did you doubt me?" But to whom was he talking? Now, we always assume it's Peter, but here's the thing. Peter is the only one who got out of the boat. Peter's the only one who actually showed faith. I actually believe Jesus' words are directed at the disciples who just sat there in the boat. And as Jesus gets in the boat, the storm stops immediately, and for the first time, the disciples worship Jesus as God's Son. This is a stunning leap in their belief. This is more than Jesus being the Messiah, because nowhere in the Old Testament does it say that the Messiah would be the Son of God. But in this moment, his disciples recognize it. But now we come to the real miracle. Jesus had told the disciples to go to the other side, which I'm sure you remember was a reference to the pagan cities, the 10 cities across the Sea of Galilee. It was there that Jesus had cast out the legion of demons from the 2 men and thrown them into the pigs, who had then thrown themselves into the sea. But do you remember what happened after that? The people from the surrounding villages came and begged Jesus to leave. He had cost them a lot of money. He had shown his power over their gods, and quite frankly, he terrified them. And so he left. But before leaving, he told one of the men he had freed to tell the people what had happened to him. It's the first time Jesus told anyone to do it. In fact, it's the only time Jesus told someone to share what he had done for them until he was resurrected. This man had no training, no background, no understanding of the Bible. His entire message was, I was the guy who lived in the tombs. I was possessed by a legion of demons. Then this man named Jesus came and set me free. I think he's God, and I've chosen to follow him. Now that's just a month before what we're talking about right now. So now Jesus shows up in the same area a little over a month later. Do they beg him to leave? On the contrary, as soon as people recognize him, they run all over the place telling people he is there. Jesus is back, they shout, and they bring all their sick to be healed. This is the second time the Gospels mention people touching the fringes of his robe for healing, fulfilling the prophecy that the Son of Righteousness would rise with healing in his wings. Now imagine the formerly demon-possessed man running down the hill, this time not to scream at Jesus, not for the demons to shout, "Why are you here, Son of God?" but to actually welcome Jesus. Jesus, I did exactly what you said. I went out and told everyone what you did for me. And look at all the people who believe in you. Imagine Jesus' joy at seeing this great harvest of Gentiles coming into the kingdom. In fact, these are the first true Gentiles to follow Jesus. Over the last month, Jesus had been rejected by the religious leaders. He'd been rejected by his hometown. He'd been rejected by his family. And he had been rejected by the people. The people he had fed had completely misunderstood his reason for being there. He had been rejected in so many ways, and now to have this massive response, it must have been amazing for him. And all of this because of the faithful work of one man telling his story. So what we have here are 3 examples of faith. First, you have the 11 disciples who never got out of the boat. Jesus' question to them, "Do you still have no faith?" shows how shocked Jesus was at their lack. After seeing the healings, after seeing Jesus' power over the storm, even after feeding the thousands, they still didn't have the faith to believe. And as a reminder, let's remember what belief is. In many churches, the word believe is seen as accepting a set of principles. As long as I acknowledge that Jesus is God's Son, that he died on the cross and rose again, or whatever other things a church may think are important, I'm good. By contrast, the Bible is crystal clear that to believe means to act on the... let me say that again. By contrast, the Bible is crystal clear that to believe means things that I know that change the way I act. If what I know doesn't come out in what I do, then I don't really believe. The disciples in the boat knew a lot of things about Jesus. They knew he could do miracles. They knew he was something other than just human. They even knew he was the Messiah. But they didn't believe because when it came time to step out of the boat, what did they do? They just sat there in fear. And this is so often true of us. We are presented with a chance to demonstrate our faith, and we just sit. We're afraid of failure, or afraid of looking too religious, or afraid of pain, or just afraid of the unknown, and we sit. Now, did Jesus give up on them because of this? Did he cast them off as unworthy? No. He loved them and he continued to lead them. And this wasn't the last time they failed to put their knowledge into action. And Jesus still loved them and called them to follow. And I'm glad he does that with us as well. Jesus won't give up on you when you fail. He'll give you another chance to step out on faith. And you may fail again, and he'll give you another chance. And you may fail again, and he'll still give you even another chance. But here's the truth. The 11 disciples never got another chance to walk on the water with Jesus. As they moved through their lives and looked back on that moment, do you think they would have given almost anything to go back and step out of the boat? I would imagine so. Jesus will continue to love you, but if you don't step out when you're given the opportunity, you may never get that particular opportunity again. Second, we see Peter put action to his knowledge. He knows the same things about Jesus that the other disciples know, but he puts action to it. Peter steps out of the boat when Jesus calls. Imagine that moment. Heart racing, muscles clenched, mouth dry, adrenaline pumping. It was probably better than any roller coaster you've ever ridden. Peter was given a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and he took it. We make a lot out of Peter taking his eyes off Jesus and sinking in the water. But do you think he ever regretted stepping out of the boat? He did something no other human in the history of the world ever got to do, and it has never been repeated since then. To the end of his days, he could talk about walking on the water with Jesus. In your walk with Jesus, you will be given the opportunity to do amazing things. You'll be given a chance to take amazing steps of faith. In 2011, I felt called by God to start a ministry called Engage. My wife and I stepped out on faith and did it. A little over a year later, we had to close it and do something else. It failed for a lot of reasons, but here's the thing. We tried. We stepped out, and I don't regret it. I would rather follow Jesus and fail spectacularly than sit in safety and never experience the thrill of walking into the unknown with Jesus. So what is Jesus calling you to do? Is it scary? Good. It means it's just going to be amazing. And finally, we have the former madman in the Decapolis. You want to talk about faith? Here's a man in a completely hostile environment. We don't often think about this, but the people in the area hated and feared Jesus for what he had done, and they worshipped other gods, especially Dionysus. They knew nothing about the God of Israel, so there was no foundation on which to even build belief. This man was literally taking his life in his hands by talking about Jesus to this people. It's more than likely that he was beaten, abused, mocked, and spit upon in his journey. The storms he faced are much more real and dangerous than the ones that distracted Peter. And he didn't have Jesus right there with him, reaching out for him, but he still persevered. And in the end, get this, he single-handedly brought a great harvest of people to Jesus. Imagine his joy in following someone he barely knew and fulfilling the mission he had been given. He walked in a place no one had ever walked before, did something no one had ever tried, and followed Jesus better than Jesus' own disciples that had been following him for months. He was the first true missionary. I can't wait to meet him. And this is the example we should follow. Throw caution to the wind and pursue Jesus' call. With no hint of doubt, accomplish Jesus' mission. In spite of all odds, stay faithful, and in the end, experience the joy of being a good and faithful servant. So what is Jesus calling you to do? Does it look stormy? Maybe. Is it dangerous? Probably. Will it cause you to go to uncomfortable places? Certainly. Will you regret it? Not even a little. At the end of your life, will you look back in regret on the opportunities you missed to follow Jesus? Or will you celebrate with joy the way you pursued Jesus? My hope for you is that you will pursue Jesus so well that you will hear the words one day, "Well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into your rest." God bless you and have a great week.